Howdy doody, my name's Terry Bush. I'm just convalescing after a brief illness. Not this flu, no, I've had mucky guts because I've been trying to get shut of all the toilet paper and pasta that people have given me. So I've been eating that and it's, goes straight through me. While I've been at leisure, I've been having a reminisce and I was thinking about Christian and Julian's babysitter, Lydia. Now this were before they went in the infants prison. This were before that thing that happened with the horses and the knives and all the fires and stuff like that. They were dead young anyway, and they used to have a babysitter called Lydia Sucklebury, her name. You'll know her. Her dad were Johnny One Eye. Now that seems cruel, doesn't it? But there are a lot of Johns, aren't there? And most of them have got two eyes, so more of an adjective really than anything. Anyway, so Lydia, Christian and Julian hated her like they hate most people and things, and they used to call her Lydia Chlamydia. They were only 3, but they knew that word. They were dead advanced actually, dead advanced. By the age of 4, they were both fully pubic, sexually active and all, but that were mainly with household pets, and barnyard animals. So the other boys and girls were safe for the time being, and they were born fully toothed. They had 3 sets of teeth before they were even 13. Well, 6 because there were 2 of them, because they were twins. So they'd found this Ouija board in the loft. If you don't know if you're posh, a loft is an attic to you, but we called it a loft because we're not. And they'd found a Waddington's Ouija board up there. Used to be able to buy it, and do your own little seance. I didn't used to like it. Kathy thought it were alright. I were more of a Scrabble man, me, or perhaps Game of Life if I were feeling flippant. Anyway, so they found this Ouija board, and they're both up there trying to contact the other side. And actually, one time they convinced me that they'd contacted their mum, and she'd said to tell me that it was definitely a suicide and that them two had nothing to do with it, which seems like gilding the lily a little bit, doesn't it? Seems convenient, and me think the dead lady doth protest too much. They also told me to pass on a message from her that she'd always hated me and never loved me, but I knew that were rubbish because Kathy wouldn't have used those words. She thought the word always were vulgar. Anyway, so Lydia Chlamydia, the babysitter, she starts reporting all these bizarre and strange events. Like one time she found hundreds of dead magpies outside on the patio, and she didn't know how they'd come there, but I knew because Christian and Julian were famous for dipping moths in antifreeze, so I could explain that. But I couldn't explain the blood that were running from the taps. I don't know where that had come from. It could have been rust, I suppose, but this Lydia, she were convinced that it were martyr's blood, but I should have thought that were with Christian and Julian, it were more likely to be cat's blood or dog's blood or perhaps Stalin's. Lydia also reported that there were excrement running out of the light fixtures onto her, and but again, that could have been Christian and Julian up in loft, couldn't it? Punctured the septic tank. They'd have been up there laughing. Because they spent a lot of time in loft because they had an animal hospital up there, they called it, but it were more like an animal harem up there, or an animal testing lab they turned it into, because they enjoyed that kind of thing. Used to always find the local animals after they'd finished with them dumped, covered in lipstick and makeup, stinking of fags. So and anyway, they convinced Lydia Chlamydia that they'd summoned Rasputin, if you know Rasputin from the Boney M song, and perhaps before that you'd know him from Tsarist Russia. And so they've convinced her that Rasputin were the one. He were poisoned, stabbed, shot and drowned to death, and that's where the Russian verb to raspute comes from. And they'd been gaslighting this Lydia, basically using the guise of Russia's greatest love machine, and they'd put up posters, constantly playing this Boney M track. It is a good tune though, isn't it? and they'd learned Russian just to do it, just to mess with her, because they're clever lads, you know, they're advanced lads, but they just use their powers for evil. And you know, they'd got hold of a Walkman and took the tapes out and recorded all these subliminal messages from, you know, from Rasputin, and they were doing all these silent phone calls and heavy breathing, but in Russian. And she was starting to believe that it were a Siberian mystic called Greg. And it sent her around the twist, you know, madder than a fruitcake she were. In the end, she turned insomnial because she weren't sleeping. And she were whipping her back and legs with a car aerial that she'd snapped off my Talbot Sunbeam. Snapped it right off at the root, and you know, that were one of the costs of it. She were wearing sacks, Cossacks, and living in the woods at the back of her house. They called it woods in the papers, but it were more of a copse, really. But I suppose copse doesn't sound as dramatical, does it? And you know, she were worshipping at an altar that she'd made from pastry and magpie wings and string. And she started to believe, and when I say believe, Christian and Julian had gotten her to believe that she were actually the reincarnated female version of Rasputin, and that she were also pregnant with a little baby that were Rasputin, and that baby were pregnant with a little version of Rasputin, and that baby were pregnant. You get the idea, just like a, you know, a progressively, like a Russian doll, but of mental illness. And she ended up getting sectioned. They caught her eventually with a net in the woods, cops, and they ended up treating her with electricity, rough handling, and gruel, I think it were. And they eventually just beat it out of her, I think, and she recovered. I think she left the town, and last I heard, she were in Brunswick Bay, and she now owns and runs a Russian Tsarist themed coffee shop called Zarbucks. So it never left her.